Thank you so much for the introduction, Margaret. And thank you all for coming to this presentation. It would be very brief. It would be 30 minutes in the presentation and another 30 minutes for question and answer. Any questions unanswered would be answered through personal one-on-one talk or through emails. So the voice of the indigenous peoples in northern Philippines is actually a summary or a bird's eye view on the voices of indigenous peoples in my part of the country, in the Philippines. So it would cover a little bit of the background, the Philippines, who are indigenous peoples, and the voice would mean how would their voices be heard, through what means, and how does the government respond to this indigenous people's voice. It would also cover some of the problems that we encounter in the field and the imperatives or those that should be or could be done to improve the situation. And we have here a map of the Philippines. My friend here has a printed one, but maybe we can use my map. And it comprises of 3 main regions. The upper one is the Luzon area. The middle one is the Visayas, and the southern part is Mindanao. The typhoon that has damaged the part of the Philippines passed through the Visayas area. And the Philippines is part of Southeast Asia, and it is an archipelago covering 1,100 islands, as they say. But depending on the time of the day, during high tide, you can see maybe 7,000. And during low tide, you can see 7,100 islands. The population of Philippines is 92.3 million as of the official census by the Census Board in 2010. And guess what is the population of the indigenous peoples in the Philippines? According to the Episcopal Commission on Tribal Filipinos, we have at least 40 ethno-linguistic groups around the country, or 6.5 to 7.5 million indigenous peoples. According to the National Council on the Churches in the Philippines, there are 60 ethnographic groups. And according to the office I work with, the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, there are 95 ethno-linguistic groups, or approximately 12 million to 15 million indigenous peoples. So I would like you to look at some of just a place to give you an idea of what a rural area in the indigenous people, in the indigenous communities in the Philippines look like. This is one of the heritage areas in Bunnell Way, in my province, and it has rice fields, and depicted in the pictures are, in the slide are pictures of people we call indigenous peoples, but for us there, we call them people without the indigenous. These are also photos of our brethren from the other provinces. We have Isnegs of Apayao, and Kalanguya in Benguet, also Ibaloys of Benguet. We have here Ifugao and Bontoc. So we have a variety of colorful pictures of indigenous peoples in my region. And what do you think would be the meaning of indigenous peoples? In the UN Subcommission on the Prevention of Discrimination and Protection of Minorities in 1971, they defined indigenous peoples as indigenous communities or peoples and nations who are distinct from other sectors of societies in their territories, so meaning in their own territories, and they are in non-dominant sectors of society, determined to preserve, these indigenous peoples are determined to preserve, develop, and transmit to future generations their ancestral territories and their ethnic identity. from the perspective of the International Labor Organization in 1996, they say that indigenous peoples are descendants of the aboriginal population living in a given country at that time of settlement or conquest by some of the ancestors of non-indigenous groups. These people tend to live in conformity with the social, economic, and cultural institutions which existed before colonization or conquest, and they do not fully share in national economy and culture owing to barriers which they have identified as language, customs, creed, or prejudice. So these are definitions from the UN bodies. Our definition of indigenous peoples at the NCIP would be this, a mixture of the two, plus others which they feel are important. Indigenous peoples or indigenous cultural communities are a group of people who share common bands of language, customs, traditions, and other distinctive cultural traits, who have under claims of ownership since time immemorial occupied, possessed, and utilized a territory. These homogeneous societies, identified by self-ascription, they call themselves, and ascription by others who have continuously lived as a community on community-bounded and defined territory. And it goes forth to say that these indigenous peoples share common bands of language, customs, traditions, other distinctive cultural traits, and who have true resistance to political, social, and cultural inroads of colonization became historically differentiated from the majority of Filipinos. And they shall likewise include peoples who are displaced, but they have resettled or they have resettled in other parts of the country aside from their ancestral domains. So this is the definition from Republic Act 8371 that created the National Commission on Indigenous National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, where I work with. In 1970 until the 2000, they also mean indigenous peoples are also known as ICCs now by the law that created the office I work in. They also label us as cultural minorities. They also refer to us as tribal Filipinos. We are more of the tribes, not the mainstream Filipinos. The ethnic minorities and highlanders. Highlanders would connote people coming from the mountains. So they see us as not one from the lowlands where urban population are. And in the northern Luzon, my area of coverage would be Region 1 and Cordillera Administrative Region plus Region 2. But I would be talking more on the Cordillera Administrative Region because it is the area where most or majority of the population are more of the homogeneous indigenous peoples. And Regions 1 and Regions 2, we have small population of indigenous peoples, but they live within the two regions, Region 1 and Region 2. So, Cordillera Administrative Region, if you look at the map, going back, we have 6 provinces, Benguet, Ifugao, Mountain Province, Kalinga, Abra, and Apayao. And we have 2 cities, one in Benguet and one in Kalinga. The importance of the Cordillera Province, the Cordillera Administrative Region in the nation, is that its population is 1.6 million as of May 2010, and a land area of 1.8 million hectares, or 6.1% of the total land area of the Philippines. And it is also composed of 24 ethno-linguistic groups. Ethno-linguistic groups mean that people share the same common culture and the same language or dialect. But under the 24 ethno-linguistic groups, they have more subgroups. And another importance of the Cordillera to the nation is that it is the watershed area of northern Luzon, which provides for water here in the other adjoining provinces, low-lying adjoining provinces of Cagayan, Isabela, Nueva Vizcaya. On the left side is Ilocos Norte, Ilocos Sur, and La Union. So it is a watershed, meaning forests abound our area. It is also a vegetable-producing region, and all the produce of the Cordillera Administrative Region are being brought to the other neighboring provinces or to the metropolitan Metro Manila, the capital of the country. It has mines for copper, gold, and other minerals. It has dams because of the water. It has tourism potential because of the rice terraces, because of the natural caves and other attractions, man-made or natural attractions for tourism. And also, it is the center of education, especially in Baguio City, which has they say the all-spring weather, which means there's no much hot or that there's no much cold weather. And it caters to the tertiary or college level educations. Ifugao, my province, is also dubbed as a World Heritage Site because of its man-made rice terraces. Now, in the 70s, the clamor for recognition of the indigenous peoples have pushed for the passage of a law, but this was enacted in the 1990s during the Ramos administration. The Republic Act, which recognized, is RA 8371, or the IPRA, Indigenous Peoples Rights Act of 1997. And the mandate is that the state shall recognize and promote all the rights of indigenous cultural communities and indigenous peoples. The main provisions of the IPRA are the rights to ancestral domains and lands, the right to self-governance and empowerment, the right to social justice and human rights, and also the cultural integrity. IPs, or Indigenous Peoples' voices in the first, are reflected in not only recognizing that lands belong to the people, indigenous people within that area, but also for their concept of ownership goes beyond owning or utilizing. And they have the right to develop the lands and their natural resources for their development. And they have the right to stay in territories in cases of displacement due to natural calamities. They have the right to regulate the entry of migrants to their territories. They have the right to safe and clean air and water, the right to claim parts of reservations that were passed as reservations for military or for parks. They have the right to resolve their own conflicts, internal or among other IPs, and they have the responsibility to maintain ecological balance, to restore the nuded areas, and to observe the laws of the Philippines that would also cover them. So, in the right to stay in territories in cases of displacement, it was explicitly stated that it's only during calamities, and the introduction of big projects should not displace the indigenous peoples of their lands. So in this aspect, our office, the NCIP, works with the indigenous communities in delineating. They would self-delineate the territories that they own, and the office would process for the land titling for families or clans, and domain titling, ancestral domain titling for indigenous cultural communities. The second major right is for the a right to self-governance and empowerment. So self-governance in terms of economic, social, as well as cultural development. And also, it recognizes the clamor of the Cordillera Administrative Region, or yes, for the autonomous region in northern Philippines. This was enshrined in the Constitution, but it has not actually passed into another special law for its being regarded as an autonomous region. The right to self-governance and empowerment recognizes the justice system that existed within these indigenous cultural communities, and the recognition of the conflict resolutions and institutions and peace-building mechanisms that are employed within these ICCs should also be respected, promoted also. The right to participate in decision-making, because most of the time, decisions would come from the top and would only reach the communities for their implementation. But this law recognizes the right of the indigenous peoples to participate in decision-making. The right to determine and decide priorities for development. Our office helps facilitate the coming up of comprehensive development plans for the indigenous peoples. They themselves craft the plan, and the right for recognition of tribal barangays. The roles of indigenous of peoples organizations are also enshrined in this right, and the provision for the means. The government must provide means for the development and empowerment of these ICCs and IPs. The third one would be on social justice and human rights. On equal protection and non-discrimination of ICCs and IPs, the law goes back to the UN Declaration on Human Rights, also on the Convention of the Elimination against women, the discrimination against women, and it also adheres to the international human rights law. So, rights of the IPs during armed conflict is also placed in here, that there should be special protection for them during armed conflict. Freedom from discrimination and right to equal opportunity and treatment. Unlawful acts pertaining to employment, because if you look at the physical descriptions of indigenous peoples, we are not as tall as the others, so our office would give certifications that these people belong to the indigenous communities where they come from, and the uniform or where they should apply must recognize that they should not be discriminately treated because of their physical attributes. And also to the delivery of basic social services. That's why we have education, we have health, and others that are being given to these communities. The right also of women, children, and youth, and the integral system of education that should also encompass the culture of the people, be integrated into the adequate system of education for the youth to respond to the needs of the youth regarding education. So the fourth one is on cultural integrity. Cultural integrity goes for the protection of indigenous culture, traditions, and institutions. And also on educational systems. Our office, we tried to incorporate some of the indigenous knowledge systems and practices in the elementary education and place them into the formal training of these young students for them to assimilate the culture that should be taught in school. So we did that. We piloted it in the elementary and in the college level. But now we're happy that the national government in the Philippines have mainstreamed the idea of enculturation putting culture into the main curriculum, which is taught in school. So we have the recognition of cultural diversity, community intellectual rights, especially on the arts, and also in the IKSPs, or the Indigenous Knowledge Systems and Practices, and rights to religious, cultural sites and ceremonies. They should not be violated because of the introduction of projects or whatever from outside forces, be it the private sector or the government. Access to biological and genetic resources, sustainable agro-technical development, and funds for archaeological and historical sites. So in this fourth major right that is enshrined in the law, we conduct the free, prior, and informed consent, meaning the communities, the ICCs, must be consulted. They must know what the program, what the plan that would be implemented in their areas, what would be the pros and the cons of these projects, and how much of it would go back to them in terms of development, in terms of the positive effect into their community. And they should say, or they should consent to this before any development comes in. So that's the fourth right. We would like to present to you the challenges that are being experienced within our office. The first one is the implementation of the law that created our office and all the mandates that it has given us. It's during the after the passage of the law, it was questioned outrightly at the Supreme Court because they anchored the question on its constitutionality. The justices, the members of the highest court decided 7-7, so it was a tie. And the rules of procedure in the Supreme Court says that if it is a tie, the law is upheld. So it's constitutional. And also the implementation of the law, since it has a lot of aspects, like you're working from the culture, working to the land titling, recognition of the ownership and titling of the lands, until the social development services delivery. It encompasses a lot of work that the implementation of the law would be focusing on what the needs of the communities that we perceive as workers in the NCIP. Another problem is on funding. So the national government gives us funds for the implementation of projects and programs as identified by the office, but these are meager funds, so it does not cover all the needs actually. When we try to compare our budget with the budget of the other regular departments, we think the budget of the entire office of NCIP at the national until the provincial level is equivalent only to a budget of one regional office of a regular department. So that's the irony of it. Funding does not come so easily. And we have organizational limitations, like we have lots of staff, but when they retire or when they get off the office, we do not easily rehire other people to continue the works of the organization. And we have lots of problems in the conduct of the free and prior informed consent process, the FDIC, as well as the other projects, example in land titling, because we are working with other departments within the national bureaucracy. And with all these challenges that has come to the office and as we have experience in implementing the IPRA, I would like to show you just a short movie about the place. This is Bunnell Way, and I would like to maybe get your opinion about this. So
rice terraces here in Bunnell Way are ancient. They're 2,000 to 3,000 years old. People have been living here and farming here for that long, and it's a simple way of life here, and these people have been living in these mountains for thousands of years. They use the water when it rains here in the rainforest, and they channel it through all the terraces, and that's how, they irrigate all the fields and everything, and it's just a wastegate paradise, but no one even knew it was here. The native people here, the Tuwali tribe, are kind of governed by the Mumbaki priests, and when we got here, we had to get their permission just to ride on the rice terraces. So they invited us up to their spot, and they gave us the permission at the end of the ceremony that we could ride on the rice terraces. You can see all these rice terraces and just tons of water. It's basically like a wastegate paradise. We just didn't even know if it was real or depicted like it is on the picture. So we ended up doing some research and finding out that this place was real and that the picture was exactly the way it is on here. To actually see it in person and just to be up in the mountains, it's a journey just to get here. And then to finally like come up onto the ridge and see the viewpoint, and it's like seeing the actual picture from the bill in real life, and it's just a kind of amazing thing, and it's just humbling to be up here in the mountains and to see this, and now to have permission to ride it has been just amazing.
So what do you think? What do you think? I'm asking you because this is an issue back in my place. If you go back to the challenges, it points out to the conduct of free and prior informed consent. So that's it. And it's also a promotional video for you to look at my beautiful place. But how do we tackle? What are the imperatives? What ought to be done? For the problem number one, we sought the guidance from the legal division of our office in the interpretation of the law. And every now and then, some of my co-workers would be sued in order for the interpretation of the law to come out. But this takes most of our time, especially in land titling and in the conduct of free and informed prior consent. On the problem of funding, we innovate, so we submit project proposals to different entities who would be charitable enough to give some of their funds. One of them we successfully implemented is the Nurturing Indigenous Knowledge Experts project, which we did in our province, and that's on the inclusion of culture into the curriculum of education in the elementary and tertiary level. So we had funding from the Japanese government, but it does not suffice. So we look for more. And then on the organizational limitations, we have our rationalization plan. They told the office that they should remove all the health personnels because health should be taken care of by the Department of Health, etc. And we innovate. Well, we have funding from other agencies, we innovate. We create the positions that would cater to the needs of the communities and also the office. And for the FPIC, I can say that we adhere to the protection and promotion of the rights of indigenous people. So when I asked for my friend to give me a link to the one we just have seen, the wake skating in the rice terraces, I said, I just want to present this to my colleagues in school for them to look at the beautiful place, and that we in the NCIP are working for the protection and promotion of the indigenous people's rights. So my position in that wake skating would be, what is the final decision of the community? It should not come from me. It should not come from the office, but the final position of the community. Community meaning the bigger community, not just the owners of the rice fields that we just have seen. So thank you very much for your patience, and Hagio. Hagio? Yes.
Can you say a few more things about exactly what the FPIC is? I'm not familiar with this, if it's...
Yes, it basically protects the community from developers. For example, those that who are interested in constructing project regarding the use of water to generate electricity. So the communities who are directly affected within that ancestral domain must give their consent. If they don't give their consent, the project will not push through. So that's one of how we explain this FPIC process. It undertakes a lot of consultation and meetings with the communities, that they must be informed of the positive and negative effect of the project. How much would it cost for the company to build the project? How much would be gained from the company? And how much would go back to the communities? So those are things that we discussed during the FPIC consultations. Yes?
I was having a similar question in terms of the implementation of these regulations, specifically of the consultation process, how it works, and of the land title, because like in this case in Peru we have communities that live in areas where there are big interest in corporations, of mining corporations, oil corporations, natural gas, and these communities are settled on top of these natural resources. So I was interested about
Land titling?
land titling and the consultation process.
Consultation process. So the commission gave us the rules of the game. So it's upon the field officers to conduct the consultation. In the consultation process, there are times where the companies are not present because the consensus of the community would be secured. So the first part would be for the company to describe, to present to the community what their goals are, what their activities are, and the details of the project or the plan. So after that consultation, there is this, the community could on their own request other agencies of government or other private individuals who are knowledgeable of the plans to come also and explain to them what the plans that were presented. Are these really feasible? Will the benefits will the negative effects be hurdled by the community later on? So the community could request other agencies or entities to explain to them. And then after which, the community are left on their own. Our role would be only to document. We will not even talk about the project. We will just be documenting the process. So the communities would talk among themselves, weigh the pros and cons. Would they give their consent or no? So that would depend upon the consensus meeting. And if they have reached a consensus decision, they can inform us and we inform the company about it. If they don't want, we help them put in writing if they don't know how to write, but if they can write, they can do it in writing. If they want to, they can ask for demands. So demands would basically cover the social, some social services, among others, like yearly they should provide this much for the community, for the development of the community through the organization or through the local government. So there is a negotiation and bargaining process, after which they would be signing a memorandum of agreement or a written paper which defines the obligations of the community, obligations of the company, and will be co-signed by one of our representatives. And on land titling, our experience here is that for ancestral domain or a community-wide land titling or domain titling, there is a tedious process of talking with the adjacent communities, especially so if these are not non-IP communities. So we go through the process of helping them negotiate for the delineation of the boundaries of their territory. So for one ICC, for example, in one of the upland areas where we worked, we had 2 to 3 years of processing, especially so in boundary conflict resolution. So we have helped settle all the boundary conflicts, and then they had the surveys and the map validation where they have platted all the surveys, and then our office came up with the maps. The people and their technical experts come and look into these technical descriptions, and the process would take on from there into the Office of the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, together with the Department of Environment and Natural Resources that really do give titles also. So there's overlapping of functions. Here the national offices would work with other agencies for the recognition of the titles of these indigenous peoples or ICCs through collaborative action. Yes?
Yeah, first, my condolences to the victims of the calamity.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to find out how involved the indigenous people are in national politics.
National
Politics. And also the role of religion in Philippines.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out. Indigenous peoples are informed in the national politics, especially for the positions of president and vice president, not much with the senators because there's lots of candidates. And this is through the mass media. So we have TV, we have radio, we have the newspapers, and other people or groups who are campaigning for these candidates. So, for example, in the past elections, NGOs and other groups have gone on ground where ICCs are, indigenous cultural communities are, to campaign for their candidates. Example, our present president and other candidates, the senators. So information would come through the media or through campaign people or campaign representatives of the parties to campaign for these people. And it is a synchronized election actually from the national to the provincial as well as the municipal level. That's why they carry the party that they belong with. The local government, the local candidates would carry the party that they belong to. So for example, our president is a Liberal Party head. The local government units, the candidates in the local level, the municipal and the provincial level, would carry the Liberal Party in their sorties within the barangays or municipalities. The second one is more on what's the effect of religion. Yes, religion is some of the provisions or some of the rights of the cultural communities would be violated because of some religions, they prohibit the practice of some of the indigenous knowledge systems and practices that were ingrained in these ICCs or IPs long before religion came in. So there's a clash actually. But in our special project, we maximize the community and cohesiveness of the people, of the indigenous peoples, in coming up with the good behaviors and traits of the community, not only to be espoused or to be included in the curriculum in the school. We also encourage them to include these good practices in the curriculum so that there's a continuity. The sustainability of the practice would go on. We were not deterred actually by the encroachment of religious beliefs in the cultural erosion. Yes?
My question was regarding the geography of these communities and the difficulties, how you people coordinate and communicate with these communities so that they can be the part of the development process. Usually geographically they are scattered, and I don't know about their social culture, they are tribal systems, or they have tribal leaders, or they are just individual people. So the coordination and getting their voice and consensus so that can be put into the process of development. So how much it is difficult and how you do that?
Yes, actually. There's difficulty in the terrain because it's mountainous and the communities are located in far locations where a center point would be difficult even for them to walk just to talk. But we tried our best to have small consultations in the feasible areas where communities would gather, and do another consultation in the area so that we will not force the people to come into the center, in the central areas where it is accessible. So we walk to these areas. The tribal leaders that you were talking about is,
How is their social networking? How is their family system or the organization at the village level or at the tribal level? How they basically the fabric of the society of those communities?
we're clannish. So the clan matters. For example, in decision making, the clan would decide for the family or the clan. In a community-wide consultation, representatives of the clan would be called for the decision making. Tammy?
Which rights have you found to be the most contested by outside parties?
The right to social justice, and all actually. All. Because of the delineation, some of my colleagues were also had difficulty in the delineation, in the rights to ancestral dominions. Carla?
First, great exposition, and I think that Mexico has a lot to learn, mainly about this right to consultation. So I would like to ask you, you said that one of the challenges was interpretation of the law. So I would like to know, what's the recognition and, in the domestic law of the international human rights law? Does it have a constitutional level, or how frequent it is used, for interpretation or argumentation of this religion?
The international human rights law, as well as the CEDAW, were incorporated in the Constitution and also in the IPRA, in the law that created our office. And interpretation of the law, we usually consult with our legal division. That's why we have a legal division, and also with every province we have a provincial attorney who would guide us, because we know that every now and then legal matters would crop up. So our legal attorneys would guide us. If he or she cannot give us the right direction, we ask for the regional level and up to the national level.
And is consultation a right at the constitutional level? Is it considered like a right?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Barangays are very important in Philippine structure, but you also mentioned tribal barangays. So are the tribal barangays in a way different from the other barangays that are in some structure, or you can say in powers under this law?
Yes, tribal barangays would be for those indigenous cultural communities who are located in say, 2 municipalities, and they have the option to create their own tribal barangay, the smallest form of governance. So they can apply for this in tandem with the provisions of the local government code. It's another special law that covers the creation of tribal barangay. So it would waive the population and land area, because in creations of barangays, regular barangays aside from tribal barangays, they have to adhere with the requirements. Say the population must be 2,000 and above. The land area must be, say, there's a given number for the land area. So the creation of a tribal barangay would not necessarily recognize or undergo the process of in the regular creation of a barangay. So they did this in recognition that indigenous cultural communities may be located in 2 municipalities that belong also to 2 provinces. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I'd be interested in any comparison you've made, or whether there's good learning that's possible with our most local indigenous group, with the Onondaga, because there obviously are some similarities, and currently they're working very hard against hydrofracking and other types of encroachment on their resources.
I have read a little about the Iroquois, and I believe that they have defined their territories, where they are, where it belongs to them as a tribe or a nation, and they have intact justice system that this justice system has been passed from generation to generation, and they recognize these traditional laws. But on the hydrofracking, I don't know, maybe because the federal government owns some of the lands, that the federal government may say go on, or I'm not really sure with the hydrofracking project. That's
Connect you with the people working on
Yes.
it for the Onondaga, because I think there would be a good exchange for information. And of course, it's what you're describing in the Philippines seems vastly superior in some ways, because the Onondaga and other Haudenosaunee are part of the Iroquois Confederacy here. Those land rights are still all contested. They're still fighting those in court, year after year. So I don't think that we have put into place a framework like this, which at least seems to have so much potential.
Yes, I am happy really that this law came into fruition after the hard work of our predecessors, who have lobbied and advocated for the passage of a law for the recognition, protection of the rights of indigenous peoples, especially to their lands, to their culture, to their social justice system, among others. Thank you. So if you have, okay.
As far as the intergenerational respect, and the erosion of the wisdom tradition, in which the elders are respected as, you know, like the clan mothers, I guess, would be the wisdom, the most active wisdom body. But more generally, is there an erosion of the respect of the elders?
I see that the younger generation, where I belong, and even the younger ones, they still retain the respect to their elders.
But in terms of a lot of conversation?
Yeah. But I have seen that in the political side more, it's not like before that the eldest or the leader, identified leader of the community would usually be the leader for political leader. Now, the educated young people would go for office, especially when there's elections. So younger people are now being elected as the leaders. So the tradition of having the eldest and the wisest to be the leader of the community is now being replaced by the new trend of having educated young people who are vying for the political positions, say, from the barangay up to the provincial level. Okay, if you have no more questions, thank you very much, and I would like to give some souvenirs.
Of course. And is your email address on that?
At the back.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
And if you want to visit the Philippines and I am there, you can always email me. I might be a tour guide.
Excellent. Thank you, Ves, very much.